Hello, everyone. So good to see so many of you here already. Hello. Tell me where you are and who you are. Gail is here, Bella is here, Melanie is here, Brenda is here, Robin is here, Duana is here, Martha is here, Marianne, Robin, Marianne, Linda, Amelia. Wonderful. Oh, so many. Yeah, I know. I have a lot of followers from the USA, and so often the broadcasting times haven't been the best. But hopefully, this is appropriate for many. And I'm really excited to talk about watercolors. I won't be painting live this time, but I'm going to show you ideas, and I think they will inspire you. I hope so, because it's been so inspiring to paint with watercolors lately. You know, I have this upcoming class, Watercolor Journey, and you can find a link there on the bottom. And I've been practicing a lot, and it's always before the new class. Then I need to rememorize the techniques, and also think about why some techniques are more difficult than others, and analyze. So I often have a notebook with me when I'm painting, and I make notes once I go. Why did I do that, and why did I change the direction and such. So so I've been painting a lot with watercolors, and I want to show you some sketches that I've been painting. And this is so close to my heart, this topic, because I love art journaling, I love watercolor painting, and this combines the both. So I have this small Moleskine watercolor notebook, and I'm showing pages from this. I have also made bigger images, bigger images from these pages, so you can see them properly. So there's so many already. Oh, Rita is here from Vantaa. I'm from Vantaa too. So I live in Finland, very near Helsinki. Helsinki is just a walk away from my home, the capital city, and it's really sunny day today. Hopefully sun is shining there too, where you are. Wendy is from Texas. Hello. So let's get started. So first thing is that what I want to ask from you is that we're on a scale 1 to 10. How much do you love watercolor painting at the moment? If you start painting right now, how do you think your experience will be? How much do you love them? Linda says 10, Marian says 5 to 6, Martha says 8, Melanie 9, Rita 9, Bella says 8, and there's another Päivi. Hello, and from Vantaa too. Amelia says 8, Brenda says 8, Päivi says 9. So another question is that I'm just going to ask yes or no. Or you can answer whatever you like, but the question is that if you could be a watercolor artist, or an oil painter, or an acrylic painter, let's say by profession. Let's put the raise the bar. So if you could decide which media would you use if you were an artist by a profession, or if you are an artist by profession, which is your favorite media? Tell me about that. Martha says watercolor, and Linda says watercolor too. Marian says acrylic. think this is a really interesting question because, you know, I often feel that it's so difficult to compare these media. Belle says watercolor and collage, Melanie says acrylic, Rita says watercolor, Robin says watercolor hands down, and Gail says watercolor or acrylic. So what you see here on the background are my oil paintings in progress. And I have started oil painting about a year ago, and I really love that media. And I've been painting with oils quite a lot lately. And before that, I painted with acrylics. I still paint occasional acrylic paintings once in a while. But what was surprising when I started painting a lot of watercolors lately was that I realized that many of the things that I've learned in oils are actually really easy to put in watercolors. And I found a kind of new love for watercolors because of that. And I never realized that before. And I never realized that how I can use watercolors using the similar kind of techniques. They're so different, oils and watercolors. You wouldn't think of that, but I realized that now I can really teach some of the things that I've actually applied to oils only that can't be used with acrylics so well. So that's really exciting. So for me, watercolors are more like a media that I use for sketching. So I have a different size of sketchbooks that where I do sketching. And because I often paint quite intuitively, I don't plan my paintings so accurately, and I don't usually use charcoal or pencil to sketch the canvas before I start painting. I need to process the ideas, and so that the most traditional ideas and that the aesthetics of the shapes and colors and such, that I practice with that before I start painting on canvas. And that has been the role of watercolors to me. But recently I've realized that watercolors are so much more than I've actually thought them to be, that I've actually seen the new potential of watercolors. So I'm really excited that I have this new watercolor class that starts on July the 1st called Watercolor Journey, where I can teach you all the little tricks and tips that I've learned while sketching with watercolors, but also while creating those oil paintings. So let's get started. And now I'm going to, this time, so to keep the topic a bit narrowed, I'm going to talk about this watercolor journal only, and I'm going to focus on keeping a diary with watercolors. And because, you know, when I started sketching on this small journal again, I actually bought this many years ago, and I wasn't too keen on this. I have to admit, I'm honest. I started with page 1, which is probably not a good idea when you hold a new journal. You know that blank page syndrome hits really fast. So I started with the first page, and the first page got quite stiff, and this didn't inspire me at all. So this first one, and I made occasional pages now and then, but I didn't got the passion for it. And you know, I think that the most enjoyable thing in art journaling is that when you kind of get attached with the book, you fell in love with the book. It's like a companion. Now, I didn't feel for it when I started it, but now this spring I remembered that I have this book. So I started making pages again. I have some old pages which which bring a nice variety to the new ones. And then I've created some new pages. So I show a vast variety of these. But I will now share my screen so you can see them a bit bigger. I think the quality of the image has improved a lot. I've got a new internet connection. I found new settings from my camera and such. And I think that the colors get repeated quite accurately. But to see all the details, because this is quite a small book, I'm sharing some of the images. So I share my screen here. And then we can look more closely. So this was my start. So I think it communicates how alien I felt, like being there in the top tower and looking down and seeing and pondering what am I going to put in this book. But then I started making pages, and they're now in a mixed order. But I'm going to kind of give you some prompts for your journals. And this is not just for watercolor journals. This can be anything. And you can also create bigger pieces from these prompts if something there really excites you. So the first spread that I'm going to show you is this a thing that I actually use like a regular prompt for me when I'm creating these pages. So I think about the familiar place, usually from my garden, a place in my garden or somewhere where I walk the dogs and such. And I just start quite randomly, but then I recognize something familiar there, and I continue from there. So these are actually pages from the front garden of mine, and I have some pine trees there, some flowers, some bushes, and I quite like splashing water and then finding out that, oh, that looks like that bush and such. And I think this kind of approach also gives me, how would I say, this spring I haven't been traveled much because my dog has been ill and we haven't got the heart to take him to the kennels. And luckily the problem has been discovered and he's now on medicine and he's doing okay. But it had meant that we had to postpone our travel plans. So when I'm working from home and when I'm taking the dogs out, then I'm painting and then I'm writing and creating courses. My daily life, especially during the weeks, is not so exciting. So I love this approach that when I start painting, I can see the familiar places with fresh eyes. And if you spend a lot of time in one place, maybe this could be something that you could try to, for example, start with geometric shapes and then add some splashes of water and then find out that could this be like my front garden, or could this be like one of the flowers in the back garden, or one of the flowers that I saw when walking in the surroundings. So that's my first prompt. I'm quite a lot of these, so I go ahead. So I said then this one. I think that watercolors and all kinds of roads and pathways and such belong together. And I love these kind of scenes that take you further to the distance. So I've started with very soft layers, and then I've put some quite dark colors on the front so that it creates a sense of depth here. And I quite like this, creating this kind of fancy places that slightly remind me from certain locations when I'm walking the dogs, but are not quite like that. Then another page that has some familiar stuff and some more imaginative things. One morning when I walk with the dogs, I thought about how common birds, blackbirds, are in this area where I live. And just then a blackbird was singing right beside me, so close that it was like it would be a tame bird or something. And when I got back and started painting, I thought that I have to paint that blackbird. You know, sometimes it's just the experience pushes through. And another thing that I thought was that the combination of blackbird and then the white clouds. So I wrote that black and white day because of the blackbird and the white clouds, and how the blackbird is hidden in the scene, but sings so loudly that I can't miss it. And that was just a small moment in my everyday life that I kind of recorded. And when doing this kind of work, I try not to be too literal, and I accept the kind of loose expression that the blackbird doesn't have to look like exactly like blackbird. I don't have to take any, I didn't take any reference photos or such. The blackbird can be just loosely recognized as blackbird, you know, just some black spots and such. And then the clouds can be free, and they don't have to look like real clouds. So I try to combine the imagination and the actual experience together when creating these everyday observations. So then another everyday observation, and I actually love this kind of really mundane things, like, you know, daffodils, that sometimes when you don't cut the lawn and the daffodils are all over the place, and then you see them spreading even wider, or you haven't weeded for a while. And then one evening I started thinking about these daffodils, and I had just again, I had just some random spots of color, and then I thought that I could add some yellow, and then I thought about the daffodil, and I find this a really inspiring approach. That when I get the idea, I write it down. So I wrote down voikukka, daffodil, which is daffodil in Finnish, and I wrote it down, and then I started. I've noticed that if I write it down, I start to make stronger connections with the thing than if I only think it in my mind. So first I thought about, oh yeah, daffodils are yellow. But then I started thinking about them, their seeds, and the whole life cycle of a daffodil. And you know, it started to inspire me, really. And just a few hours ago, I watched them in my flower bench and thought that I have to weed that. But then when I was painting, I found it really inspiring, that how they need the water and the light and the whole life cycle of a daffodil. So sometimes really ordinary stuff can become really inspiring when you start digging deeper into that. Well, then another thing that is quite similar approach is that I had some ugly pages. You know, sometimes I've just started a page and it hasn't quite. For example, I have this one which I'm going to work further. Let's see if I can unfocus that a bit. Here's one that I'm going to work further. You know, with watercolors, it's so wonderful when you can add layers. Then I have some just random scribbles somewhere. So I have these kind of pages that are not quite there yet, that are just quick starts, and then I've moved to something else and just tried my pen or something. So this page was actually really, really sad looking. And then I took the masking fluid. I love masking fluid because, you know, you can draw with that. And then when you add more layers and then when you carve it out, it's often so surprising what you come up with. So when I took the masking fluid off, I realized that this is actually a place in Vanda, in the town where I live. That could be in the eastern Vanda, one place where I go quite not so often. And then when I wrote that down again, I made more connections with that, and it was quite fun. And the ugly page turned something very different. Then this is a continuing theme when I create pages. I think about the inner world versus the outer world. So here's a page where I've intentionally divided in half. And I thought about how things that I look at outside are connected with the thoughts that I think, and how my thoughts also affect the way I see things when I, for example, walk with the dogs. And this interaction between the inner and outer world was the inspiration for this page. So I thought about a tree, like the tree would grow to the both directions. And when I was painting the inner part of the tree, I saw, I wanted to add some fruits because I think that fruitful and imagination belongs together. And then when I thought about the outside world, I was thinking one of the trees that we have in our back garden and how it has started to grow a bit in a bit weird way. And I've just tried to cut it so that it would look a bit more beautiful, and how I feel that I can't quite control it. And then I was thinking about the weeds and everything that I can't quite control. And again, that inspired me to change my thoughts to my inner world, which is also sometimes something that I totally cannot control. And yeah, this is a fun prompt, this one. Then about the outer world. Sometimes when I start painting, a really, really old memory comes up. And when I started painting this page, I didn't intentionally put those rocks there, but the splashes just started looking like rocks. So I added some more spattering there, and I added some more water. And then I realized that this is actually the kind of stone fences that I've seen a lot in England. I've visited England many times, and I love England, and I've been there up north, in the south, in the London area, most of the places except Wales, where I would really like to go to. But there's lots of fences like this, especially in Yorkshire, for example. And so I just let it come a little closer to that memory, and made some subtle brush strokes that brought that place closer to me. So I love this kind of travel memories that start quite unintentionally, but then when I realized that, oh, that's like that place, then it's fun to finish the painting. Then about traveling. Now, these kind of small books, these are, of course, these are like travel journals, but I like to think about this, and also the next class that I'm giving, the watercolor journey. I like to think that traveling is not only the thing that you buy a ticket and you fly abroad and or or go to some distant places. I think that traveling also includes places near you, and also includes places where you would like to go, and also includes places inside your imagination where nobody else can actually go. So I think about this kind of watercolor journey in a wide perspective. And so I've also added some pages that record some inspiring stuff that I would like to see, like that Japanese street fashion. I would love to go to Japan. That's one place. And then also one place where I have been is St. Petersburg in Russia, which is inspired, which is the upper spread is inspired by that Art Nouveau and Russian hand-painted plates and such. So your travel journal can be something else than just you start a journey and day one you do the first page, and then when the journey ends you have to have filled the whole journal. Your travel journal can be a continuous journey, and you can bring in a lot of inspiring stuff and think about traveling much more in a much more wider perspective. Another thing that I've also done here is that I can think like what would be the souvenirs from the land of imagination. I find this prompt really inspiring. And, you know, you can think about all kinds of decorative handmade stuff. And for me, the crafts, the local crafts is always the thing. So that's a theme for one spread here. Then about a couple of years ago, I went to the Finnish Museum of Natural History, and I found it so fascinating. And I remember that as a child I used to draw a lot of animals, and I've actually started drawing more animals recently and painting more animals recently. I think that I don't know why I have stopped it for a while, for a long time, but I kind of feel that we should pursue what we have really liked as a child. And to me, animals have always been really important. Both the wild animals and pets. Pets are a really important part of my family. So this spread is inspired by the museum visit, and I remember that I made these kind of drawings when I was a child, and I wanted to do something again. So this trip to the museum can be a trip to your own art museum. Pick up some drawings that you used to draw and redraw them or repaint them. And I love watercolors because it's so easy to write on them, much easier than acrylics. And also you can use inks, colored pencils, acrylic paints even on top of them. So watercolors are like a foundation that you can use, and it's so much fun writing on those watercolored backgrounds too. So then when I talk about loosening up and getting liberated, you know, sometimes there are moments when I start painting and I want to have everything in a strict order. So I call this prompt organizing the order. So this spread is about just about random objects, and I've also been inspired by ceramics, and especially decorative ceramics. We had really great era in Finland in the 1950s and 60s. We got the mid-century modern a bit late. So the ceramics from the 60s and even from the 70s are quite mid-century modern style. And I wanted to add some ideas that could be, that I've seen in ceramics, this sketchbook, and also play with those geometric shapes. And I quite like those strawberries too. They're very simple, but you can recognize them as strawberries. And you know, sometimes you can do some really stiff and decorative stuff, and it looks just beautiful. And I like my journal to have a variety of pages. I like to browse it so that when I browse the pages, I get surprised by what's appearing there, and I love it. And I think that the best journals are journals that have filled pages and that have a lot of variety. So I love to add pages like this once in a while too. Then, speaking of decorative stuff, but now we're moving on to the bit more liberative style. So this has been painted using a lot of masking fluid and lots of layers. And I wanted to keep this quite light. And my inspiration here was, again, the garden. But I wanted to create kind of abstract thing. And this is especially inspired by Japanese gardens, because we are starting to build our Japanese garden finally. And I've been looking a lot of Japanese garden books lately, and I wanted to add those trunks of the trees and such, the subtle tones and such, and just think about beautiful Japanese gardens that I've seen, and I've seen images of too. So the garden theme can be treated like abstract theme too. So you don't have to make really clear leaves and such. You can be a bit more loose, and every element of your page doesn't have to be something that we can interpret or recognize. And it can be a bit more loose. And in this page, I especially wanted to express the light, and you know, and always when you're expressing the light, remember to express the shadows too, because it's difficult to express the light if you don't add some shadows there. And yeah, I love this page. Then another page, which has a lot of layers. And this is a reminder to me how sometimes I think that, oh no, I ruined it. And you know, watercolors, the colors look really strong when they haven't dried. But when the colors dry, they get more subtle and more pale. And this was the page that I was just unintentionally adding more and more layers. And then suddenly I realized that, oh no, it's getting quite dark. But then I had some spots that looked a bit like poppies. And I was thinking about the poppies. And my poppies are blooming at the moment, but back at that time the poppies weren't quite there yet. But I was thinking about the wind and how poppies, they stand up no matter how strong the wind is. And so this is flowers in the wind. And I think that usually when we paint flowers, we often make very erect stems, very straight stems. And actually, many flowers don't have so straight stems. They have lots of curves. And you know, poppies, they have lots of. And I think that when you think about the wind, it's easy to remember to make the curves. And also, of course, with watercolors, the great thing is that, so when you're thinking about the wind, you're thinking about how the water can spread all over the page, and you can start spattering the the color, and it's so much fun. So I've also spattered some masking fluid there, so you can see the layers there. And I love this kind of theme that is a bit more dynamic than just flowers. So it makes a big difference when you're expressing flowers in the wind compared to flowers. Then another thing that inspires me often is abstract buildings. And you know, with buildings, it's the same thing. They don't have to have every little detail. And actually, you can approach it in the more abstract angle, so that people don't even have to realize that I'm expressing a building here. It's just an abstract composition, but I've been inspired by architecture while I've made it. So I've written there that this is a modern building, and you know, these modern houses, when they have big windows and quite lots of angles and such. And I always think, when I see a new one appearing in the neighborhood, I always think, when the yard is so small and the windows are so big, that the scenes might not be so good, but at least there will be a lot of light. So I think this page expresses that quite well. I've kind of put the actual scene away and just added the light, all the good stuff that the big windows bring. Then sometimes when we have difficult times figuring out how to finish the painting and what could be seen in those odd spots of color, sometimes it's good to do the same than with the camera. That if we always take photos like this, like we're standing and the camera is always at the eye level, we don't see everything that can be seen in the scene. The same thing is with these kind of intuitive paintings. That what about if you imagine that you are kneeling down and then you're looking up? So this was what I was thinking here, that I was kneeling down and seeing a brook or something, a stream or something. And then when I look up, I see a flower, I see a tree, I see some light, and I don't see quite well what the whole scene is all about, because I'm kneeling down there and the light gets there a bit. So I find these kind of approaches really captivating. And I also I take a lot of photos, and I also try to when I take photos, I try to think about painting and vice versa. So that's one idea. What about if you imagine that you're kneeling down, you see some things closer, and then when you look up, there might be a tree, but it's really small. It's not so huge because it's in the distance. So playing with perspective like that is one idea. Then, speaking of art journaling and combining text and images, I sometimes do these kind of pages that are like, look like a bit like magazines or such. So I've used masking tape here, and I've put masking tape so that I have had two small areas, places for two small images, and then a place for one big one. And this is about a cuckoo singing in the area where I live. And, you know, I never see the actual bird, but when I hear that voice, it brings my childhood in my mind, and I think it's one of the best moments in summer. So I wanted to express that through scenes. That what kind of scenes are there? What kind of area is that where I live, and how the time stops when the cuckoo is singing, and how I can't see it, but I can hear it. And so these scenes are a bit abstract, not so representational, but I find the tension between the text and the images quite captivating, because it's about the bird, but the bird is not seen there, and I've somehow complemented the experience with words and vice versa. So that's also one thing to think about, how you can act text that describes something that you haven't painted, and then also this one, how to split the page in columns and arrange some space for the text and make many images on one small page. Then one more thing, and I have a few more, focusing on the air. This is one of my favorites too. So often when we paint everything that is really clearly visible, and we forget what's actually essential in the experience, and how just the breath of air, and how the wind and the small breath actually affects the air, affects the experience, or when we are in that scene. So what I thought when I was thinking about summer and going to near water, I was thinking of all the bugs that are in the air that I try not to notice and not to see those, but I wanted to add those in this scene, so you can see the bugs in the air. And then, of course, the wind, and how the wind blows, and the grass, how it bends, and then the actual flowers or bushes or stones and such are not so important. Then just I try to see the sun between the clouds, and how the light travels through the air. And so sometimes focusing on the air is much makes you create much more loosely than if you just think about every stone or every flower or every bush or every or the lake or the sea so literally. Well, then I remember that somebody of you said that watercolor and collage are your favorite media. So I also have some pages of collage work in my journal. So I often use, for this kind of small journal, I use this kind of small box where I have my hand-painted paper scraps that I almost threw away, and then I put them in this box, and they are really fun to use for watercolors. And then another idea with the collage, and not just for collage, but for any page. So sometimes you create a page on day 1, and then on day 500 you create the other page. And these, I think there are a couple of years between these two pages, but I wanted to continue that collage page with watercolors only. So you see how I splashed the dark paint so that it looks like it continues the other page, and how I use that similar kind of turquoise on the watercolor page too, so that they are kind of more panoramic scene. I love seeing two quite similar pages, but that are also quite different. I think this is something that you can actually, by filling only one page and leaving the other page blank, you can actually make a prompt for yourself for some later creative moments when you don't have the idea what to create. Then you can take this odd page and start completing the spread. Then a wild idea. This is really crazy. Just make a watercolor background and then just start adding words that make no sense or that are about absolutely nothing. And I love this kind of journaling because, you know, I think that when I've written all the crazy stuff, that newspaper clip says stolen in English. And and when I write all the crazy stuff, all the crazy thoughts, I actually get much more creative when I'm creating my next piece. It's like all the, you know, all the stuff in the surface has come out, and then I can focus on the most essential stuff. And I actually love looking at these kind of pages that are full of writing, and they don't have to have all happy colors as such. I kind of love the ugliness in them, if that makes sense. So sometimes you can just you know, tear a piece of newspaper or a magazine, and I've used gel medium for gluing it down, and on a wild watercolor page, and then I've just added some lines, like there would be even more writing, but it just doesn't show. I've used both white gel pen and black drawing pen for the journaling, so that there's a kind of contrast between those sentences, visual contrast there too. Then I mentioned colored pencils, and watercolors and colored pencils are one of my favorite combination. And you can also use colored pencils so that you can use them like watercolors. You can color really softly and add more and more layers and get new color combinations out of them, and then color on top of watercolors and get even more color combinations. So that's a fun idea, especially for abstract. Then I have a couple of panoramas in the end. So this is a panorama of a rainy day, and I don't know about you, but I find these kind of spreads really empowering. They don't have to be perfect visually, perfectly aesthetic or such, but when you get when you feel the experience of some kind of holistic experience. So what we have had a really dry season in Finland. This spring has been really dry, and now we have started the summertime, and the plants are suffering. Our grass is almost brown, and it's so sad. And then one morning we got some rain, and that made me think how rain is so good. That I usually always complain about rain because I have to take the dogs out for many times in the day, and I don't like walking with the dogs and the umbrella. I have 2 beagles, and with the umbrella and such, it's not the most pleasant thing. And you know, you only see dog owners when you walk on that kind of weather. But that rain was so special because we hadn't had it for a long time. So I wanted to paint it. I wanted to paint it so that it was not only just some raindrops on the paper. I wanted to paint it like a panorama, like there are these you know, these heavy clouds, and the rain is pouring, and the rain changes the whole scene. And here's another idea: when you paint a scene, ask yourself, how much difference do you need between the actual landscape and the sky? Actually, if you make them quite similar, the whole image changes. It will be so much more painterly. It will be so much more expressive if your sky meets your landscape. And you know, we humans, we don't have to see everything so literally. So you see some kind of horizon there, and you realize that this is a scene, and there are clouds, and the rain is coming down. But if you look at those areas really closely, all you see are just little abstract rectangles, triangles, just some soft spots of color, nothing specific, and you still understand what the scene is all about. And you know, sometimes I take a lot of close-up photos of flowers. I love that, don't we all? And sometimes I have to remind myself to take photos that are more panoramic too. And I think the same thing applies to our art, that if we always paint close-ups, we miss the empowering effect that this kind of panoramas can give. They don't have to be really big papers. You can create a small panorama, and it's so much fun to focus on the big picture and not on every little detail there. Another panorama that I've made recently, and this is just splashing water and then figuring out what could be pulled out of that. And also a very inspiring topic to me, morning dew, and how moisture can make flowers, leaves, so different, so much softer, so much more shiny. I often call these kind of scenes like it's a jewel weather, when you see nature's jewel all over the place. And this is one of the styles that I'm also teaching in my newest class, Watercolor Journey. And I think it's the style that many traditional watercolorists really master. But to me, it has been always problematic to follow those traditional watercolor painting books. And I've been thinking that for years, why it is so impossible for me to learn from those books. And I think I've now put a lot of stuff that explains why, and I'm showing many of those in this new class of mine. So I think that one thing is that if you want to create more loosely, if you want to start just with watercolors, no colored pencil sketching and stuff, then many watercolor books start with a reference photo, then a careful sketching, very delicate, careful sketching. Then they start with the first delicate layers, and they changed from one painting technique to another, and they follow the sketch really carefully. And that has been a problem with me, that I'm not, I don't get inspired by following a sketch. I can sketch with a colored pencil. I've made some paintings with very careful sketches, but it's it's not what I enjoy, and I feel that I don't create to the fullest when I'm sketching like that. So I've been wondering for years, how can I use all those techniques that traditional watercolorists use without following those tedious steps? And I think that I've come really close to that. And I think this, for example, this spread shows that too. I have a couple of, this is my class that I'm talking about, Watercolor Journey, which starts on July. And I hope you can join me there. And I'll show some of the watercolor pieces here in the end. I close this one and just show them here. So about panoramas, I've made these kind of panoramas that are not in a journal too. So sometimes when I've cut watercolor paper, so here you can see the size difference, that this is approximately the same size. Sometimes when I've cut watercolor paper and I've got these strips, and then I realized that I could create these panoramas. I love creating those. Panoramas can also be abstract, like in that that I showed in the sketchbook. Here are some of the work that I'm going to show more in detail in the class. And you can also create bigger paintings. When you create big ones, this combines the abstract with some representational elements, so that it's like a place in the imagination. So when you create these kind of bigger pages, you can really splash more freely. And the problem with the journal, oh, I could talk about this forever. I have to stop soon because you must be bored already. But the problem with these pages is that when you've created some, and so for example, if I've created this one, then when I turn the page and start a new one, well, what happens? Do I miss the page that is beyond this one? So I actually use plastic folders so that I put them on the background of the pages. And Phyllis says not bored at all. Thank you. And so that I don't mess them up. So that's the method that I use. But they still might get some spatters and such. So sometimes if I make a spread that I really like, I photograph it immediately after it's finished, just in case I get some kind of accident. Usually it doesn't matter, but you know, sometimes something that can happen. So I usually photograph it as soon as I've created it. But talking about the mess, I just love journals that have filled pages. I don't know why it makes me so happy to see these curly pages instead of these straight ones. Isn't it amazing how used journals look so much more loved? So if you're interested in journaling with watercolors, creating these small pieces, or making bigger pieces and using cotton, 100% cotton, a better paper, there's a lot of differences with papers too. Then whatever you do, the class is for you. I've made it so that even if you want to create bigger work, smaller work, it's suitable. And we start with techniques and how to combine them, and then we move towards more bigger work, and which is more complicated combinations and more layers. You know, the problem with watercolor painting usually is that you step out of the painting, you stop too soon. That's the most common problem. And I think that with the class and with the encouragement and with the feedback, I have every Tuesday, I have a feedback day where you can post any work of yours during the class. And with the feedback, you get encouraged to continue. It's surprising how long you can continue watercolors, even if when you start adding the first layers, you think it's finished, but it's actually not. One of the big secrets of traditional watercolorists is that they keep on adding layers, and that's really important. And that requires a little bit of practice to realize that, oh yes, I'm not near in the end yet. So when I've been creating these pages, I've stepped away, came back, added another layer again, and came back. So something that we don't normally do, and that adds depth, that adds color variation, that adds all that quality thing that can be seen in watercolor pieces. Starting with subtle colors and then moving towards more layers. Many people think that when they see beautiful watercolor paintings painted by professionals, that when the colors are so vivid and intense, they think that they've started with intense colors, but that's totally opposite. You make a lot of layers, and that's where the intensity comes. So I hope you will join the class, and I will post the link on the chat when I finish, and the page where you can purchase the class. There are quite a lot of people already. I'm really excited. I think that many of you probably also have already signed. So thank you for everyone who has signed, and I hope you will join me and get really inspired by watercolors. No matter what you answered in the beginning of this session, I think that watercolors have a lot to give to you. When you learn the layering, when you learn the abstract stuff, when you learn the adding depth, you realize that you actually can add skills to other media as well. It's not just watercolor painting. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much. And it was so much fun to talk when there were so many people watching this. And for you who watched the recording, you can watch it right here after this session, and I will also post it in my blog and on my YouTube channel, probably tomorrow, but very soon. So thank you for attending, and have a great day.